The crisis between Israel and Iran escalates. How deadly could the conflict become? And what are the implications for the region? Hello, I'm Mike Walter, sitting in front on Baidu, and this is The Heat. Iran is striking back at Israel, unleashing a barrage of missiles Friday in retaliation for the Israeli assault on Tehran and other parts of the country. Israel wants to destroy Iran's nuclear capability. There are developments from Tehran to Jerusalem and a reaction from around the world. And with fears growing that the crisis could escalate in the region, the United Nations Security Council scheduled an emergency session on Friday. We begin with correspondent Jim Spellman, who joins us from our CGTN newsroom. And Jim, what can you tell us about how all of this unfolded?
Well, Mike, the Israeli attacks began early Friday. Planes, missiles, and drones targeting Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure, killing several top Iranian military leaders. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the attacks were necessary because Iran was moving closer to acquiring a nuclear weapon. By Friday night, Iran retaliated, launching dozens of missiles at targets including populated areas of Tel Aviv. Tehran calls the counterstrike Operation Severe Punishment. In televised comments, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei said Israel made a grave mistake and will not be able to walk away unscathed. No reason to believe the fighting is over. Just within the last hour or so, we've seen reports of sirens in Jerusalem, and indeed journalists on the ground there say they've reported seeing drones in the air and heard explosions. The Israeli Defense Forces had told people within the last hour or so to go to bomb shelters. Essentially, just within the last few minutes, Mike, they've been told that they can leave those areas, but should remain close by.
Jim, what about international reaction? What are we hearing there?
Yeah, well, let's start at the White House. U.S. President Donald Trump spoke on the phone with Prime Minister Netanyahu Friday, but the White House did not provide any details about what the two leaders discussed. Trump also met with his National Security Council in the White House Situation Room, but so far no readout on that either from the White House. The White House says the U.S. was not involved in the Israeli attacks, but Trump says he was aware that the attacks were coming. The USS Carl Vinson aircraft carrier strike group is currently in the Persian Gulf, and the Pentagon is moving at least 2 destroyers to the eastern Mediterranean. And we know through U.S. officials that the United States has been assisting Israel with intercepting some of those incoming ballistic missiles from Iran. No details yet about whether that involves the U.S. fleet. The Israeli attack comes as the U.S. had been engaging Iran in fresh rounds of talks over Iran's nuclear program. Trump says he gave Iran 60 days to make a deal, and the attacks came on day 61. U.S. negotiators had been expected to travel to Oman on Sunday to meet with Iranian officials for the next round of talks. Iran says will not attend those meetings. The long-term outlook for the talks unclear, Mike.
And what about later developments today? We know that the UN Security Council had a meeting to talk about this. What do we know about that?
Yeah, the UN Security Council met Friday afternoon at the request of Tehran. Iran's representative condemned the Israeli attacks, saying they targeted civilian sites and called the attacks state-sponsored terrorism, while accusing the U.S. of being directly involved in the attacks by providing arms, military support, and political cover to Israel. Israel's representative accused Tehran of targeting civilians in its counterattacks while aspiring to eradicate the state of Israel, and said Iran should not be allowed to have nuclear weapons. The meeting adjourned with no resolutions being forwarded. China, during the session, condemned Israel's actions that violate Iran's sovereignty and security and opposed the expansion of the conflict. They called on all parties to abide by UN charters and international law and to resolve the conflict through diplomacy and dialogue. Mike?
All right, Jim, thanks so much. Stay put. Hopefully, if we get new developments, we can go back to you there in the newsroom. Thank you so much. There's much to discuss, so let's get right to our panel. Joining us from Boston is Kaveh Afrasiabi. He is an Iranian-American political scientist and author specializing in Iran's foreign policy as well as its nuclear affairs. Also joining us, Dan Arbell. He's a veteran of the Israeli Foreign Service and currently scholar in residence at the Center for Israeli Studies at American University. And joining me here in the studios, Jamal. Abdi, he is president of the National Iranian-American Council, and I want to welcome all of you to the show. Kaveh, why don't I start with you? What's your reaction as this crisis unfolds?
Well, this is clearly a blatant aggression on Israel's part, violating international law, UN Charter, Article 2, which prohibits armed conflict and calls on all member states to peaceably resolve their disputes. Israel has used the lame excuse under the familiar rhetoric of self-defense to wage an unprovoked war against Iran by targeting its military, civilian, and nuclear infrastructure, causing civilian casualties and so on. And this should have been condemned at the Security Council today, and the Council skirted its historic responsibility to condemn a blatant act of aggression by member state against another state violating its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I imagine that this vicious cycle of full-scale war between these two countries will go on for a while. Who knows what the duration will be? It requires the timely intervention of world leaders to put a stop to it. And unfortunately, President Trump, who came to office with the promise of acting as a global peacemaker, has been very inconsistent and basically has acted as cheerleader for Israel's aggression, naked aggression against Iran. And hopefully President Trump will see the light of the day and will exert some pressure on Israel to de-escalate and stop its very unlawful and illegal aggression against Iran.
Jamal, let me ask you about the scale of these attacks. There's been attacks in the past, but the scale this time seems much more dramatic. Military leaders, nuclear scientists targeted as well. What's your sense of this? And I know, having talked to you before, as you came into the studio, you're somewhat surprised that this actually happened.
Yeah, I think this. A lot of us thought that this was a bluff. Heading into negotiations, the United States and Iran, Donald Trump finally at the negotiating table with the Iranians. Remember, he abandoned the Obama-era nuclear deal and said he wanted a better deal and could not even get to the negotiating table in his first term. Second term around, he is saying all the right things. He's warning about war with Iran would be impossible, and so we need to get a deal. He's saying, my bottom line is no nuclear weapon. He's not talking about some of the ultimatums that have dogged talks in the past, enrichment, dismantlement, things like that. And so I think voters, I think supporters of the president, I think many people thought he was serious about delivering diplomacy. This is the art of the deal guy. To have those talks suddenly dismantled through military action, that there is just, I mean, now we're finding out, the president certainly knew about it, if not gave a green light to it. It boggles the mind. What is the end game here? And anytime there's military action, you know, anytime there's a war, the first question needs to be, how does this end? I don't know how this ends. I knew how diplomacy ended. I don't know how these military strikes end and how bad it's going to get before it finally does end.
Dan, you've been in the diplomacy arena for quite a while. How does this end?
Well, we're just in the beginning, Mike, and Israel is continuing with its attacks and targeting Iranian nuclear facilities and other military bases and strategic locations inside Iran that are part or connected to the Iran nuclear program. Certainly, for decades, Israel has been calling on the international community to put an end to Iran's nuclear program. This has not happened. Just this other day, this week, the IAEA, the international watchdog, published another report saying Iran is breaching its understandings and agreements with the IAEA of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran is not cooperating. Iran is hiding its activities on the nuclear front. And at a certain point, Israel has reached a decision that the time has come for it to act, because if it doesn't do so now, Iran will soon be in the possession of an actual nuclear bomb. So this is something that Israel had to do. It's been in the planning stages for a long time, just waiting to be executed, and now it's taking place. And again, we are seeing Iranians' reactions, and the third barrage of missiles has just fell, in central Israel, and this will probably go on for a few days until each side feels that it suffices and that they could go back to business as usual. But it's certainly not going to happen in the next 48 hours.
Dan, you heard Jamal talking about how Trump's at the negotiating table with Iran. There are some that feel that Netanyahu was determined to sabotage efforts at a deal between the U.S. and Iran. Do you think that's a legitimate thought?
I definitely think that Netanyahu and the Israeli government were unhappy with the decision by Trump to engage Iran in nuclear talks. We're surprised and unhappy, and we're trying to convince Trump not to go in that direction. And when he did embark on this path, they continued to voice concerns. I think that at a certain point, Netanyahu was able to at least convince the president and his senior staff that perhaps it would be a good strategy both to continue trying to engage Iran diplomatically, but at the same time, show Iran, present to Iran a credible military option in terms of Israel's reaction, and then perhaps coerce Iran into compromising and coming to the table in an effort to finally reach a reasonable deal over its nuclear program.
Jamal, one analyst put it this way, kind of to get back to your earlier point. Netanyahu may view an air campaign as quick, clean, and decisive. It is much more likely to be messy, risky, and costly. And as you said, you begin a war, it's got to end at some point. What's the end game? Is this going to be messy? Is it going to be costly? I mean, what do you see this becoming?
I have not heard of the scenario that is laid out where this ends well. I think at best I've heard wishful thinking that the Iranians will just give everything up. They'll come sheepishly back to the negotiating table and say, you know what, 20 years of this, billions of dollars of investment, staking, nationalism and everything on this program, we're just going to hand it over because the attacks were so big. I think that is a very far-fetched scenario, and it's hard to not see this as, to the extent that it was planned out, is the goal here to try to dismember the regime, and actually this is a regime change war. And if that's the case, well, then what comes after that? And then what comes after that? What comes after that? I know Trump is saying, I don't know how seriously, but he's saying that he thinks that actually this will bring the Iranians back to the negotiating table. And again, given how much the Iranians have staked on this, given the fact that the Iranians wouldn't even meet directly with Trump, it was quite a accomplishment for the administration to actually get those negotiations, but they were through an intermediary. So even negotiating with the United States was sort of a big domestic political risk and something that Trump has squandered. And I think the reason we can't really figure out how does this end is because the goal was not to actually win a war. The goal was to stop a deal from happening, and that was the biggest threat, the potential of a deal, the potential of lifting sanctions. We know the Israelis actually fear the normalization of Iran and lifting of sanctions more than any nuclear program or supposed imminent threat that they've been talking about for the past 30 years. And
Kaveh, I'm just hearing from my producer in the studio that, in the control room, that there's several more explosions heard in Tehran. So we're continuing to see these bombing in both directions. As I mentioned earlier, military leaders targeted, nuclear scientists targeted. Talk to me about the shock value of what's unfolding here, and what does this do to both the military and the nuclear program itself when they target these specific individuals?
Well, as the head of the International Atomic Agency has repeatedly stated in the past 24 hours in particular, there are a lot of international protocols prohibiting armed attacks on active nuclear facilities. So Israel is in violation of those international protocols as well as the UN Charter. Let me correct some of the falsehood that was just relayed by your Israeli guest concerning Iran's nuclear program. The US's own intelligence directorate in April this year stated very clearly that Iran is not pursuing nuclear weapons. And your guest said that Iran is not complying with the IAEA, etc. And this from a rogue nuclear state that does not allow the slightest iota of international inspection of its various nuclear sites, because we know that Israel possesses some 200 plus nuclear warheads. And if I may just read one very little section from the 2025, March 25 IAEA report that says, since February 2025, Iran has been facilitating the implementation of a strengthened safeguard at its facilities. Now, is that the sign of a state that is in violation or in compliance? Iran has subjected itself to the most rigorous international inspection than any other state. And all these allegations about, traces of enrichment or experimentation done in 1995, anything, 25, 30 years ago. These are way in the past that have no relevance to what is going on today. And what Israel did with Trump's complicity was to scuttle a meaningful opportunity for peaceful resolution of the present nuclear standoff with Iran. And the Israeli media today reports that there was a duet between Trump and Netanyahu. They engaged in an art of deception to lull Iranians into a false belief that Israel is not going to attack. So that raises serious questions about the motives and sincerity of the White House with those diplomatic grounds. Was President Trump sincere when he said that he wants the resolution by imposing this arbitrary 60 days limitation, either deal or war? Who engages in international diplomacy like that? Give me a break. And Israel now, President Netanyahu has added another file record to his inglorious image as a war criminal by engaging in an unprovoked war against a sovereign state, wreaking havoc in the region and endangering global peace.
Kaveh, we've got to kind of move on here. I get your point there. I also want to point out that we're hearing that there are more explosions being heard in Jerusalem as well. So several explosions in Tehran and Jerusalem as we speak right now. And Dan, maybe that's a good point to start about. Iran is warning Israel that they can expect severe punishment. I mean, what are we going to see in the days ahead? And I'm sure you want to respond to what he just said.
So yeah, it's amusing to hear Kaveh talk about Israel as the aggressor when Iran has been the aggressor for the last 30 years, constantly finding ways to attack Israel and to use violence against Israel, either directly or through its proxies in the region, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Houthis in Yemen. And so it's really, there's a saying in the Middle East, if you live, don't hurl stones if you live in a glass house. So this is what's coming to Iran after years of aggression. Second, he quoted the IAEA report from March, but he should quote the IAEA report from just this week, which states that Iran is in clear breach of the NPT and of just agreements with the IAEA. And third, this is Israel anticipated when it planned this attacks that Iran would respond, that there will be Iranian retaliation. But Israel was able early on to decapitate, first of all, the senior leadership of the Iranian military and national security, and also hit facilities and systems that would, otherwise participate in this retaliation against Israel. So we saw it took Iran a long time to respond, and now it's responding, and that's something Israel has expected. But Israel is resilient, and so is the Israeli public, and we're going to see this play out for the next few days. And hopefully this will reach a situation in which both parties feel that the time has come to end it. And Israel clearly with an achievement of, if not eliminating Iran's nuclear program, at least scaling it back or slowing it down.
Jamal, let's talk a little bit about Dominos, action, reaction, because the Middle East, it's all about that. He brought up Hezbollah. I have a friend who's in Beirut. He's concerned about his family members because obviously that could be a tinderbox. And that's what happens here. Something happens here, something happens there. And I don't think a lot of times when people see something like this unfolding, they don't think about the overall ramifications. This could have a spillover effect. what are some of the dire things we should be thinking about? Where do you see this going?
I mean, the big domino is that this makes it far more likely that Iran does build a nuclear weapon. The Israelis can set the program back by weeks, maybe by months. They can't remove the program completely. They can kill nuclear scientists. They can't remove that knowledge from Iran. So this is sort of widely accepted that, you know, the Israelis, possibly the Americans, will have to go in and mow the lawn, repeatedly bombing Iran if they try to rebuild their program, and then we're just in this state of constant war. So there's one domino that likely is already dropping. You look at the region, you look at sort of the two impulses right now when Trump came into office. There's this notion of negotiating with Iran and sort of integrating those negotiations with what the administration did with the Abraham Accords and trying to build the Abraham Accords, which I think are deeply flawed because they left key actors out and essentially became an arms agreement. But the philosophy behind it was economic interdependence across the region. Instead of having these endless zero-sum wars, you actually have some sort of positive-sum engagement between the parties. And I think that there was a real opportunity to pursue diplomacy with Iran that could then become a part of this larger process, and so we don't have a region that's constantly at war. That domino has now fallen. And then you just look at, I mean, you can't have wars that don't impact generations of people. The hope of Iran and Israel one day being at peace, I think, is completely scuttled. And whether it's inside of Israel, whether it's in Iran, whether it's across the region and people seeing the genocide in Gaza, now this unprovoked illegal attack, I think it's going to have enormous long-term repercussions that I don't think are front and center for Israeli decision makers. I think a lot more of this decision was based on the immediate political interests, and whether it's Netanyahu at home or Trump potentially striking this deal that sort of upsets Netanyahu's desired security infrastructure in the region, which is, you know, Israel and the Arab states against Iran. So that's all now muddled, and you know, the dominoes are flying everywhere, and it's not looking good.
And Dan, I want to get your thoughts on that too, about the potential dominoes here. And as he pointed out, you know, hopes of living peacefully in the region, it doesn't look so positive right now.
You know, a peace between Israel and Iran was nothing that really was on the table in recent years, and not something that the parties were trying to reach and failed. This is not something very much out of reach and has been for many years. I think that Israel is what we're seeing now in the region is that, you know, countries are at awe. They're watching what Israel is doing to Iran. Iran that has been hailed as a regional power with all these capabilities, and Iran is just one chip after another collapsing. These dominoes that Iran had are collapsing, and so certainly exposing Iran's vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And I think that people in the region, while publicly regimes in the region, Arab regimes in the region, watching this unfold, are certainly silent publicly, but I'm sure that they're cheering Israel from the stands on what it's doing, and they're certainly hoping that Israel would, you know, put an end, or at least bring some comfort in terms of dispowering or you know, taking Iran out in terms of capabilities. So I think it's certainly something that Israel could find allies in the region for this for these goals.
Well, Kaveh, let me ask you about this. Can Trump rein in Netanyahu? I mean, what's the role of the United States? Where do you see an off-ramp?
Of course, the White House has a lot of leverages on Israel that, should President Trump choose, can, you know, exercise and implement them, and force Netanyahu to start this insanity of war of aggression against Iran. You know, this myth that the Arab world is cheering for Israel is absolutely ridiculous. The Arab world hates Israel for what it has done to the Palestinians, killing them by tens of thousands, most of them innocent women and children, and starving them to death. You think there's any sane Arab in the street that supports Israel these days? You got to be kidding yourself. You know, it's like you stick your head in the sand like a pheasant, unable to see the reality around you. And you know, a newcomer like Israel on 2% of Middle East land, with less than 5% of its people, claims hegemony and domination over the region. These hegemonic ambitions are elusive. They only lead to catastrophe for people of Israel, most of them are huddled in shelters today. Even Prime Minister Netanyahu, who wants to cause regime change in Iran, is hiding in his bunker with his defense minister, according to Israeli media today. So, you know, what is going on here? There is no sense of reason and rationality.
I do want to get, I'm sorry, I have to cut you off because I want to get some final thoughts from Jamal. We're looking at, you know, we talked about Hezbollah, we talked about Gaza, Syria, Yemen. I mean, it seems like in some respects, Israel may be overextended. What are your thoughts on that, and where do you see an off-ramp?
Israel being overextended, I mean, I think the Israelis are very confident right now, given what has transpired over the past year, and I do think that that has led to them misreading the situation. And as far as off-ramps, you know, I think what we need to watch over the next couple of days, and as this goes forward, is what does the Iranian retaliation look like, and does it preserve in any way space for a diplomatic off-ramp? Or does this escalate? You know, if Israel is not going to stop, if it's not going to be tit for tat, but it's going to be constant barrage, you can see the Iranians start to enlarge this, start to look at the Persian Gulf and driving up oil prices and other means of sabotage. If we get to that point, it's hard to see an off-ramp that's peaceful.
Yeah, well, we'll be definitely keeping our eye on it. Thank you for your insights. Thanks to all our guests. Really appreciate it. We're going to have to leave it right there. Thank you as well for watching us tonight.